And then turn it over to Jim for some general requirements.
Well, now that we've got it recording, we talk about the real stuff, right? So as Wes said, and as you all share, there's a lot of good reasons to build your client file. We can recognize it's a lot. It's a lot to have to ask your clients to gather. It's a lot for you as a staff to have to go through and to maintain. But these are some of the reasons that our funder makes us force you to have those extensive files. They are mentioned in the regulations for all of our programs. And when you get these slides, you'll be able to click through if you're like Wes and enjoy reading regulations. You can click right through there. They are pretty fun. It's nice to be able to see exactly what the government's requiring for these. And it does get into the legalese, but we can be a resource for that as well. If you start going through the regs, you're like, hey, what does this mean? Or I saw this, can we change our approach here? Reach out to us as your grants analysts and we can cover that. Client files are also covered in your award agreements. I know all of you read every single page of that, what is it, 32-page funding agreement. But they are covered in there along with all of your other program requirements, hitting on client eligibility, and then it details the things that you have to keep on file. And some of those, we do have requirements that some things are captured in HMIS or DD client track, and that's going to include demographics, enrollments, move-in dates, exits, annual assessments, things like that. And as you said earlier, that paper client file or that client file really moves along with that HMIS record. So these things that are in green there, those are going to be captured in HMIS. Aside from those things, you really have some flexibility on how you maintain your client files. If you're super old school and just want to have everything paper, that is totally plausible. If you don't want to have any paper and want to have, if a paper gets signed or if you look at the eligibility document and you just want to get it saved somewhere and it's off of your desk, that is fine as well. If you could dive through those regs, you'll see that the feds call out microfiche as an option to save your documents too. So that tells you when those regulations were written as well. So if microfiche is allowed, you can save it in the cloud or on a flash drive or whatever. So we mentioned a couple times that this is a lot of stuff to ask for, to track, to keep on hand. One solution to make this all easier for you all is a client file checklist. And those do exist within each of our program manuals. You can see we've got a link to our COC manual and the ESG RRH HP manual along with HOPWA. I did get on our ESG webpage, we do have separate client file checklists on that page now to try to make your life a little easier. Just know that these checklists do have limitations. Wes is going to speak to a few of these, but they might not capture everything you need to do or kind of drive you down the track that you need to be on. There might be other program requirements that are captured in that checklist. So reach out to us and we can be of assistance there. And I'm going to pass it over to Abigail to talk about HMIS entry assessments. Oh, Wes, I'm passing it to you.
We're going to stick with the theme of the client file checklist. As the name suggests, a checklist helps assure that you're completing everything that's needed. And we discussed manuals a lot on the grants team. And my opinion is that the crux of a good manual is a very good client file checklist. Because that's really where these programs meet, the rubber meets the road. It's where you, the frontline case manager, you're actually interacting with the client. So we're just going to spend a moment with the COC client file checklist. In case you've yet to visit our website, it's a little hidden here. It's in.gov/IHCDA. And go here to the menu, and you have the program partners pages, and can choose COC, ESG, or HOPWA. Maybe your agency works with some of our other programs. But very top, we have our manual hyperlinked. Can you move the recording over a bit? Thank you, Troy. Yep, I will do that. Thank you, sir. Okay. So I'm not going to go through all this, but ideally you'll find a logical way to organize your client file checklist. Most people like to start at the beginning and work toward the end. For our COC agencies, this checklist serves 3 project types: permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and transitional housing. This is what I would call a commingled checklist. So this is where the case manager discretion comes into play, because we don't have this customized for each project type. Ours is more or less organized chronologically. None of the 3 of us authored this manual, but we're hoping to, on the COC team, I'm hoping to update it soon. But loosely, the documents are organized chronologically. Looking at the list, you can see at the very top the eligibility documents: homelessness documentation form, proof of chronic homelessness, and disability verification. So those last 2 elements I mentioned, you see as applicable to the right. These 2 only apply for permanent supportive housing. So you have to have that behind your eyes when you read this checklist. So I'm just going to highlight quickly the new homelessness documentation form we have. So this can serve any of the 3 project types: PSH, RRH, and TH. This is an example of best practices. So starting at the top, clearly put your agency and project name. So that might be Human Services, Rapid Rehousing, or Edgewater, PSH, whatever agency applies. And then use your discretion. If you want to write the client's name on there, go for it. But if you'd be more comfortable writing the HMS ID number or DD client track number, you can do that as well. But we revamped this form for you to reference anything you might possibly need. For example, if we look at the far left column, you have the 3 subcategories of literal homelessness: unsheltered, shelter, and exiting an institution. So we revamped this to have clear headings in each of the charts. And of course, we have a category 4, homelessness. And then if you kind of read to the right, you'll see that you have options on what type of documentation you can use to establish the client's homelessness. And if ever you disagree with how this is presented, please let us know. But we were happy to put the regulation there at the top, so you can check our work. And please think of this as a cover sheet. On the far right, you're supposed to check next to the documentation that we've attached. And speaking to best practices, this is a type of form that the client and case manager should sign. We put a little parentheses at the bottom that if it's a client self-certification, the client definitely needs to sign. But there are times where it's not feasible to have the client with you when you document that person's homelessness. And so there you can kind of flex the rules. Hence the parentheses we put at the bottom of this part. Okay. And some people in this audience brought it to my attention that we did not have the appropriate logos at the bottom of our form. So I am sincere when I say put this through the ringer. Vet our resources. If they don't cut the mustard, let us know. Push us to be better. Okay. We ask a lot of you. HUD asks a lot of you, and I think it's appropriate to get some good play. Challenge us to be better. All right, back to that checklist. This is just one of two forms that I'm going to highlight. As we make our way through the housing workflow, we progress from that eligibility documentation to some of what we might call enrollment. Is the client agreeing to be in the program? Are you informing that client of your grievance and client termination policy? Okay, so that's kind of more after the eligibility established, you can do some enrollment work. Moving on, we have your income and rent calculation worksheet. So you need to know the client's income, and later when you know the rent that's expected, you can help calculate the client's share of the rent. And I'm sorry that this isn't in the best order, but other elements are those for unit eligibility. So for all project types in COC, rent reasonableness, does the unit fall within the rent reasonable range? If you are one of our 2 TH projects who use leasing dollars, your unit has to be both rent reasonable and at or below FMR. And over on the ESG side, rapid rehousing and HP, both standards must be met. The other element of unit eligibility is your housing quality standards inspection, HQS. Soon we're going to be implementing Inspire for ESG and COC. It goes live on October 1st, but for the time being, we're sticking with housing quality standards. In HOPWA, they're already in the transition period between Inspire and HQS. I used to work on the monitoring team, and we'd see a number of common errors on the HQS inspection checklist. So I just want to point those out, and then I'll turn it back over to Abby. But there are actually 2 different forms that HUD offers: an 8-page checklist, or if you're new to HQS inspections and you want more context, there is a 19-page form where in between the checklist, you have full page explanations of what in a room to inspect and how to inspect it. So if you're newer to case management and you want some more context, go in search of this HQS form, and I'd be happy to provide that to anyone. On both of these forms, regardless of which one you use, we commonly see that people forget, and it's very understandable why, people forget to put the year the unit was constructed. Why is that important that you note the year the unit or building was constructed? Yes, lead-based paint, yes. If it was built 1977 or prior, you know that lead-based paint may be a consideration. January 1st of 1978 and thereafter, you know you're in the clear because that's when the federal regulations took place banning lead-based paint. So that's commonly overlooked and because it's very small. We also have people not put a 0 in the column of number of children under age 6. That again ties to lead-based paint for tenant-based rental assistance. And then you've done a great HQS inspection and you've gone through all 9 pages, but you failed to go back and put pass, fail, or inconclusive. So if a compliance monitor sees that, then that might be a concern or finding, depending on how frequently it's occurring in the client files. So those are just 3 reminders. And once had someone who had great client files. She was a very diligent case manager, and she wrote the date next to every line in the HQS form. Thankfully, I saw that early and encouraged her to stop that. Okay, so don't spend your time that way. Maybe only use the date column on the far right if it's an inconclusive element or it's something that requires more elaboration. The date on the form once should suffice. Yep. So, yes.
On the inspection form, on page 7 and 8, towards the bottom, is page 7, the brief little part, is that required? And then on the top of page 8, is that signature required? For monitoring. Yes.
Okay. Page 8 is required if you see an element that did not pass and requires work.
So if we didn't see anything, you're not required to sign it then? I'm being told by something different by a IHCDA monitor, so. That number.
Okay, it's best if I write that down and get back to you. As I read the instructions, it says provide a summary description of each item which resulted in a rating of fail or pass with comments. So I take that to mean if there was nothing like that, then this field is not necessary. These forms do have instructions sometimes, so I would be happy to read the instructions and provide you that answer. So, thank you. Don't have.
Findings, so that's why, and she said that not a lot of people knew that. So that's
Okay.
why I bring it up in front of everybody to
Okay.
ensure that
Yeah,
where that is.
that's good. I'm happy to be stumped and I will do the research and get you an answer. Matt? Okay. Okay. All right. I will confirm that for you. Thank you. I'm sorry for the times we provide conflicting messages. That's,
We just want to confirm.
okay.
My question is a lot. I'm just wondering when an inconclusive result, how does that occur? If it's pass, fail, or inconclusive, what would cause inconclusive? Would that be an incomplete, inspection? You weren't able to complete then?
Probably if you didn't have access to that area to inspect,
Oh, okay.
that would probably be something that fall into that.
So would it pass?
You would need to be, you need to come back. Like, so that's why you would note it as inconclusive, so that you can revisit. Because all the elements would need to pass.
Oh, I have one more question.
Go for it.
Okay. If a client has, if the unit is inspected for a client and that rental does not occur, and then another unit is found for that client, Should there be two different HQS forms
Yeah,
and two different lead-based bank forms?
so this is unit specific, the HQS inspection checklist. So if you had done the work on the unit that was a no-go, it definitely would have to be redone on the unit the client is actually gonna pursue.
Okay, and, if after, do you have to fill out a whole new form if it has failed? If the HQS fails, do you have to use a completely new form? Or can you indicate on the original form when the pass occurred?
Maybe just put like initially.
Yeah,
or something.
okay. I'm not gonna provide you a speculatory response to that. So I have two things. Page 7, the signature field, how it's used, and then what to do in those situations. Fail if you can reuse.
That's the new form.
Okay.
You have to use it.
And I will get your contact information. All right. Thank you for those. As I said, I'm not a practitioner, so you're the best person to do the stress test on these resources. And thank you for making me feel uncomfortable. It's a good thing.
Wes doesn't like not having the answers.
I like research. More serious note, Abigail.
And that's been recorded.
There we go, we're back. Okay, so we can't talk about client documentation and not talk about HMIS. And for the purposes of the next two slides, when I refer to HMIS, I am referring to both HMIS and the DB client track environment. So just to preface that out of the start here. So there's been a lot of talk at this conference already about being able to track if a client's income has changed over time over their enrollment in your program, if there's been a change in employment, et cetera. We know that this is going to be important, especially for our COC folks, with the new NOPO. So how do we do that? Well, the HMIS entry assessment and exit assessment are two ways of doing that. Other ways that that is done is through your annual assessments and your during program update assessments. I'm not talking about those today. We do have data quality copy docs where we talk about those more in depth, but today I just want to talk about these entry and exit assessments. So the entry assessment should be consistent with the beginning of the client's interaction with your project. This entry assessment, after you click at the top of your screen, you're going to click that intake button on the client's profile, and it'll prompt you through these smaller assessments. For almost all projects, this is made up of that HMIS barriers, HMIS universal data, domestic violence, and financial. Depending on your project type, there may be little pieces of these smaller assessments that are not required for you. If you are operating a shelter project that's night by night, you're not required to fill out financial information. You can for the client if you have it available, but it's not required. So all of your projects are set up into the system with the exact workflow that will require the exact things that need to be required for that client profile. And often you see this as you're working through that enrollment, you can't move on if something is required and it doesn't have an answer. I will say, as we've been working through PIT and HIC this year, making sure that we get through that universal data assessment. That's after you've entered the general information for the client. It's asking about the barriers. It's asking about prior living situation. It's asking about COC enrollment. We have found that to be quite an error for us when we run these big, larger federal reports. So just keep that in your mind if you take that home as a tidbit. Making sure those UVEs are completed is really important. So how does this entry assessment impact the COC closeout process, Wes?
Yes, so under universal data, with the prior living situation, anytime you answer something other than literal, something that would be categorized as literal homelessness. So maybe the COC client came from a temporary situation or a permanent situation. When we analysts go to do the closeout, it's a website called Sage. HUD actually looks at your APR. And for any client that is not labeled as literally homeless, we have to provide HUD an explanation. So this usually means I'm working with an executive director who's doing the closeout, and they rely upon your case notes, specifically the eligibility piece, to provide me a succinct answer. And then I have to provide that to HUD to satisfy them and finish the closeout. So just for the COC subrecipients, when you get to that second part of your entry assessment, you're gonna have people who, they come from a permanent situation. This kid was living with one parent who was housed, and maybe that parent died. And so that was their prior living situation. It was permanent, but you gotta be able to provide that explanation to your ED, who then passes it along to me or Dorita. So there is a continuous thread through all this.
Wonderful, thank you, Wes. Okay, so now pivoting to the HMIS exit assessment. This exit assessment should be consistent with the end of the client's interaction with the project. So that is the end of the story of that client with your program. This is asking for all of the same information. Has any of this changed? This exit assessment produces that outcome data for the client's enrollment. So this is where we're looking at change in income, change in health insurance, housing, et cetera. It's very important before we walk through the rest of that exit assessment where we're answering those questions about whether or not there's been changes in those statuses, that we choose the correct exit destination. So we know this is also going to be a priority, especially for our COC folks with the new NOFO, what that exit destination is. And I really want to hone in on the fact that the exit destination is the where, and it's not necessarily the why. So there may be a client who is exiting, they're exiting to, maybe it is a temporary situation, but they're living with friends and family. Maybe the cause is there's been a divorce and that client is going through that process. And that is a temporary housing placement, but the why would be there's this external factor here. Well, that exit destination does not have to be the why. It is just the where. So for a little bit more clarity on this, for our residential projects, so emergency shelter, TH, Safe Haven, project-based permanent supportive housing, and I'm branching out a little bit here from COC and ESG. We expect that exit destination to be where that client moves out upon exit, and where they're expected to be moving immediately after. For projects where a client is not expected to relocate upon exit, and this could be loss prevention projects, rapid rehousing projects, similar services. This would be where the client is expected to stay after they complete project activities. And this very well may be where they stay during the program enrollment or prior to starting that project. So a little bit more information here. Word of mouth from the client is okay for source of exit destination. But we really want to try and strive to just take that from the client themselves. There's always the opportunity to go back and update an exit destination if we need to. If there's information that wasn't available previously, but is now available a little bit of time afterwards. There is the option for exit destination to be other. I want to just preface and touch on that quickly in the room. Other should almost never be used for exit destination. That is only an option if there is no other circumstance that describes that client's situation. And if we are selecting other for exit destination, we do need to reach out to HUD, an AAQ, and let them know what the situation is and why none of the other options fit that client's destination. If that happens, we need to do that. Please reach out to the HMIS or DD Help Desk. Let us know and we can support you in that as well. We do have, and Daniela put this together at the end of last year. She put together a wonderful data quality coffee talk talking about exit assessments. And she goes into so much more depth than what I'm going to do today. So I've got it linked here on the slide. Please go revisit that if you have additional questions about exit assessments and how they calculate those outcomes. All of these outcomes you can see in your respective APR or keepers when you run them. If you have questions about where to find those outcomes in those two reports, let us know. So how does this tie into grant closeout? I think this is specific for ESG.
Thank you, Abigail. And I just wanted to put another plug in for the importance of completing the exit destination piece. When when you report your ESG, when you submit your paper for your ESG projects, those roll all up and that gets submitted to HUD and they look at our balance of state program. Thank you. They are looking at, did we have, what's our percentage of exits to positive destinations? So HUD is really ranking our ESG balance of state program by that exit destination. A lot of times you guys are doing awesome work and getting them to those positive destinations. We just got to make sure it's captured. And so, HUD looks at this. I also look at this when we're making ESG awards. So in your application, you see where I have you look at those couple questions from your paper. What I do is I rank your percentages of exits to positive destinations. And then you're scored based on that ranking. So it's critically important to, if you know it, make sure you get that in. Some more best practices as we move on. Following our theme for today's presentation, your client file should tell a story. They should really tell where that client started, kind of what activities, what they've been through in your program, and then how they've exited. You want to be sure that forms are complete and correct. Be sure to reach out to us if you have any questions. These can be handwritten, but other people need to be able to read your writing. So make sure that it is legible. Signing and dating forms, follow what's indicated on the form. We already had a question about that, but really, hone in on what's dictated by that form. And then you're going to organize these usually chronologically. We haven't seen any other ways that folks have done it, but there might be other ways that you would organize your client files based on what makes sense to you and your agency. Some security measures, we'll touch on these briefly. You're holding, as you know, a lot of people's most important information about themselves. They have given you that and trust you to keep that safe and not fall into other people's hands. So we learned about from some other agencies, the double lock policy, just making sure there's 2 locks between the public and those files, whether that's your office door and a file cabinet, or the front door and your door, just making sure that there's 2 locks between the public and your files. Make sure that things are not on your desk. I have a problem with this, but I'm not dealing with client files, so you know. But make sure that things are filed away when they don't need to be out on your desk. Time-bound and signed release of information agreements. These help protect that client that, it's for this particular reason and this particular time that you're able to share my information. So that's another best practice. Make sure your computer's locked once you walk away. I know we got new computers for the state and it was set on like 5 minutes that it would lock, and it would lock right in front of me while I'm doing work. So maybe that's a little aggressive, but make sure that you're locking your things down before you walk away. And then don't share passwords. This goes for everything across the board, but really, especially with IHCDA, your HMIS password, that should be you. If you need other users set up, you can reach out to the help desk. For the claims for IHCDA online, you should have your own username for that so that we know, hey, if something, we need to ask a question, we can see who filed those items. All right, I'll turn it back over to Wes.
So there is a chance that your project may be monitored, about a 25% chance. That's what the odds. Okay, we want to stress that monitoring is an opportunity for process improvement, or if everything's going well, then just to shine your light and showcase that you're doing great work and get us out of your hair really quickly so that you can go back to doing that great work. we decided to organize this based on question words. So you will get a monitoring notice, probably by email. And you'll have a timeline in there. Typically, you're expected to provide the client files within 15 to 30 days, but the monitor has some discretion. That person will provide a timeline for you. And each of our funding streams has a different document retention policy or term. So for CFC and ESG, it's 5 years. For HOPWA, it's 4 years. So to give a HOPWA example, your last claim was paid out this month. So that's kind of like the last claim in the award. You're projecting 4 years from now. So those client files will need to be maintained through 2030, April of 2030. We see this sometimes, especially with PSH clients. The client has been in your project for 15 years and you get monitored and you give us 15 years worth of files. We don't want that, and neither do you. All right. You want to be a minimalist. Give us only what we need. Okay. So ESG is a great example of this. Their program year for rapid rehousing, all program years, July 1st through June 30th. Okay, well, we're monitoring the award that happened last year. July 1st, 2025 through June 30th of this year. Well, that client probably took out a lease on, I don't know, January 1st. So you have a client that we've chosen to monitor, but she's straddling, or her time in the project spans 2 program years. So you need to provide us everything for that first half, you would need to provide, 2 leases and all of her enrollment material. Okay. And if it's unclear, you can work with your compliance monitor to see what you need to provide. And then the how are you gonna provide these? If you have paper files, you'll upload them to Microsoft Teams. It's a secure folder. Only your agency and your designated contacts in our monitoring team have access to that. And if you are housing your client files in HMIS or DB Client Track, our compliance monitors do have access to that. So you would simply have to tell your contact, hey, all the client files are already in HMIS or DB Client Track, and your work's a little bit easier. Assuming everything's well with your client files, you shouldn't have too much more to do with the monitoring as a case manager. So we didn't highlight any stories of lived experience. And many of the people you serve, their stories may never be heard, and that's perfectly fine. They probably want that privacy. But you all, in the intimate way you interact with them and assist them toward housing, you in a small way get to share in their story and accompany them, hopefully to a positive outcome. And though it may seem banal and burdensome, the client file documents you create and store, they do tell a story. And the 3 of us wish you continued courage and success in your work in homeless response. So we'll end there. Daniela, do we have time for a few questions? Okay, we have 1 minute for questions. Yes, Stephen, do I see?
Is it acceptable to use HMIS as your place to store all of your client files, or is expected to have a paper or file basis in addition to HMIS?
Okay,
It's
Well-
not the question.
I'm going to delegate this one to Jim because he is a manager.
That's a great question. And we know that there's been, some differing instruction on that over the years, and we're investigating that for a long-term solution. But I would say your best practice is if you want to keep your case notes in there, that's good. I would recommend, I'm not on HMIS team, but I would recommend that you keep things in a separate file and not in HMIS. But if you have further questions on that, do reach out to us and we can guide you in it. We'll have some guidance out later on, hopefully this year.
If there's gonna be guidance issue, there'll also be a suggestion of software.
That's a good note. We will have that in our conversation. Yeah, last question, since you guys are beating us up on this. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure that when it comes to exits, if we use that other, or because it's happened to us twice, actually we've not heard from the client, they just disappeared. Should we reach out to help desk to figure out the best way to put in that exit?
Yeah, so if we don't hear from the client, then we just, the recommendation is to choose that no exit interview completed. And then, there's another option under destination that I'm blanking on.
Destinations.
Or that is what it is. Unknown disappeared is an option. I think the recommendation would be to select that. So, yeah.
So if you put the exit destination, not done or whatever, that doesn't count against us or anything, right?
It's not a positive outcome. It is.
It is not a positive outcome.
If
So
it
is that-
disappear from the program, I argue they didn't want to share.
Sure.
That's
Sure.
right.
You can-
But if we put that one there,
it will,
it deems something.
damage your data quality because that's not what party would want. For clients to disappear, but it is something that happens, right? It is a very valid answer. So as long as you document that and not choose the other, because there's also other, right? But that other is not very specific, and like Abigail said, you should only use that when none of the options apply to the client. So, other is not a good option, if, you know, but, if it's not a good interview completed, you can explain that
In the note.
in the notes.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Definitely reach out to us.
Is there a survey?
Oh,